Chapter 54. The First Divination Requester. Upon seeing Klein's odd expression, Angelica immediately felt her beliefs waver. Is that so? Mr. Glasses mentioned that you were able to tell of an ailment in his lungs simply from observation. Her voice softened until she finally shut up. Observation? A dark glabella. Klein was instantly enlightened as he shook his head with a chortle. I believe Mr. Glasses was mistaken. He was planning on being perfunctory, but after recalling that no one sought his divination services the entire afternoon yesterday, his mind whirled. It affected his goal of acting as a seer, so he explained. It's actually a form of divination. Divination? But Mr. Glasses only mentioned that you observed his face. That's also considered divination? Asked Angelica in shock and doubt. Klein smiled, composed. As a member of the Divination Club, you should know about palm reading, right? Palm reading was not patented by the Foodaholic Empire. Even on Earth, India and old Europe had developed similar principles, much less in a world with beyonder powers. I know about it, but it seems you did not read his palm. Were you observing him in secret? Asked Angelica curiously. I was using face reading. Klein cooked up a lie. Its principles aren't very different from palm reading at a fundamental level. Really? Angelica's eyes were filled with disbelief. In order to develop his career as a seer, Klein chuckled. He pretended to be in thought as he tapped his glabella twice. He focused his eyes, and Angelica's aura presented itself. Her head was purple, her limbs were red, her throat was blue. There was no problems with her health except for some colors being dull. However, that was a manifestation of ordinary fatigue. Klein then looked at her emotions and saw orange mixed in with some red and blue. It also meant warmth coupled with some excitement and thought. Thankfully, after realizing that there was nothing abnormal about her, Klein planned on deactivating his spirit vision. But it was at that moment when he suddenly saw rich darkness hidden in the depths of her emotional colors. Furthermore, she is lacking a little of white, an eagerness to improve. Klein nodded while in thought. Mr. Moretti, were you reading my face? Seeing the young gentleman in black in front of her turn silent abruptly, while seriously sizing her up, Angelica keenly noticed something. She asked in a half-curious and half-worried manner. Klein did not immediately reply. Instead, he tapped his glabella lightly as he wore a look of scrutiny. Just as Angelica was feeling unease, he said warmly, Madam Angelica, there are some sorrows and pains which you should not seal in your heart. Angelica's eyes widened as her mouth turned agape. However, she did not say a word. She looked at Klein in his half-top hat with an apparent scholarly bearing. She heard him use a deep, comforting, and warm voice to say, You need to either go mountain climbing, a game of tennis, or perform a tragic play to exhaust your body due to exercising. Let your tears flow down uninhibited, then cry and scream. Express all those emotions. That will be very helpful to your health. The moment those words entered her ears, Angelica felt like she had transformed into a statue. She stood there motionless. She tried hard to blink as she lowered her head in a fluster, saying deeply, Thank you for your suggestion. It seems like there are many members here today? Klein did not continue. As though he had not done any divinations prior, he turned to his side and looked at the meeting room at the end of the corridor. Sunday afternoon. At least 50 members. Angelica's voice sounded a little hoarse. She only mentioned the key terms. She paused as her vocal pace gradually returned to normal. Do you want tea or coffee? Black tea. Klein nodded slightly. He politely took off his hat and slowly walked to the meeting room. Only when he vanished behind the door did Angelica exhale slowly. Why not? The Divination Club's meeting room was very large. It was nearly twice the size of Klein's high school classroom. In the past, only 5 or 6 members would be present, making it look extremely empty. Now, there were dozens of fortune tellers sitting in different spots. They filled up most of the room. Sunlight shone into the room through the few oriel windows. The members were either discussing softly among themselves or asking Hanas Vincent questions. Otherwise, they were practicing and attempting divination or drinking coffee and reading newspapers by themselves. Such a scene made Klein feel like he was back to his schooling days on Earth. The difference was that it was noisier and more rowdy back then, without the tranquility of the meeting room. He looked around, but he didn't see familiar faces like Glasses or Edward Steve. So, he casually picked up a divination textbook, found a corner, and started flipping through it leisurely. Very soon, Angelica came in with a cup of tea and left it on the table before Klein. As she was leaving quietly, she suddenly saw Mr. Moretti take out an exquisite-looking silver chain from his left sleeve. There was a chunk of pure topaz hanging on the silver chain. What is he doing? Angelica slowed down subconsciously and focused her gaze at Klein. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand and allowed the topaz to hang above the black tea, just short of touching the surface of the liquid. With a serene expression, he half closed his eyes and the atmosphere around him suddenly turned quiet. The topaz started moving slightly, along with the special-looking silver chain, in a clockwise direction. Upon seeing this, Angelica found Mr. Moretti extremely mysterious. "The black tea you provide is great," Klein said softly after he opened his eyes with a smile. His actions were intentionally done for Angelica to see. If he wanted people to select him for his divination services, Angelica's recommendation was a very crucial factor. Since he wanted to act as a seer, Klein no longer had any reservations. He completely personified the identity. "Yes, Mr. Vanez is very picky about the quality of tea," Angelica said, stunned. Klein put away his spirit pendulum by winding it properly. Then, he raised the white porcelain cup with floral design. With a smile, he gestured politely at her with his cup. Angelica returned to the reception hall, but she no longer had the mood to read magazines. She sat there, gazing into the distance. It was a wonder what she was thinking about. This continued until there were knocks on the door. She jolted awake and hurriedly looked at the entrance, only to see a lady dressed in a light blue dress. The lady took off her veiled hat with a powder blue ribbon. She looked calm and melancholic. "Good afternoon, esteemed lady. Would you like to join the Divination Club, or are you looking for a divination?" Angelica asked like clockwork. "I want a divination." The lady had a beautiful pair of eyes hidden with sorrow, and she bit her lower lip as she spoke. Angelica guided her to the sofa and explained to her how the Divination Club worked in detail. She picked up an album and handed it over. "You can pick anyone." In her low spirits, the lady flipped through the album seriously. As there were too many club members there that day, there were too many choices. It left her quite upset. "Can you recommend one? From these few pages." And, She pointed at the middle section of the album, omitting the fortune tellers priced above 2 soldi and those below 4 pence. Angelica took the album and looked at it for a few minutes. She deliberated her words before saying, "I suggest this gentleman." The lady, who looked uneasy, took a glance and realized that it was a fortune teller named Klein Moretti. "Mr. Moretti just joined the club? Is his divination reliable?" she asked worriedly. Angelica nodded with great affirmation. "Another member of the club and I are certain that Mr. Moretti is an outstanding fortune teller. If it wasn't for his just joining the club, he wouldn't take such low fees." "Now, monsieur, I understand." The depressed girl nodded. "I'll pick Mr. Moretti for a divination then." "All right, please hold on for a second." Angelica took the album and walked towards the meeting room. She came next to Klein and said with a suppressed voice, "Mr. Moretti, someone wants you to divine for them. Which room would you like to use?" That was effective. "My first business is here." Klein put down his teacup and nodded calmly as he said, "Topaz room." "All right." Angelica walked slowly ahead of him and led him to Topaz room before opening its wooden door. Klein sat behind the table that had various divination tools on it. He waited less than a minute before he saw a woman in a light blue dress walk in. She looked down and melancholic. Seizing the opportunity when she was closing the door, he tapped his glabella twice. The yellow color in her stomach seems a little dull. The dark color of her emotions is very heavy, mainly worry and anxiety. Klein looked her over carefully and leaned backwards. He then lifted his hand to cut off his spiritual vision. "Good day, Mr. Moretti. When I was..." The woman in the light blue dress sat down. Good afternoon. How may I address you? Klein asked politely, not carrying much hope of getting an answer. As a keyboard warrior, he knew that many people were not willing to use their real names during divination. You can call me Anna. The girl put her veiled cap aside. She looked at Klein with mixed anticipation and doubt and said, I would like to divine about my fiancé's situation. He traveled to the southern continent in March for a business deal. He sent me and his family a telegram last month on the 3rd, saying that he was going to set sail and return. But he did not return after 20 days. At first I believed that his delay was due to the berserk sea's weather, but as of today, it has been more than a month. The ship he took, the Alfalfa, still hasn't arrived at Enmat Harbor. The ocean that separated the northern and southern continent was called the Berserk Sea. It was well known for natural calamities and its countless dangerous currents. If it was not for Emperor Roselle, who sent men to discover a few safer sailing routes, countries in the northern continent would still have yet to enter the age of colonization, let alone lay an underwater cable to complete a transoceanic telegraph. Klein looked at his very first client of his career as a seer and asked carefully, Which divination method do you wish to use?